I know you're probably thinking you already made 2 videos on your opinion on the characters. Why are you still making them? What's even the point? But you all genuinely seem to like it a lot, and I like making these videos from time to time, so we are back again to state my opinion on every character's B-Quirk this time. I will be trying something new by getting much more specific with damage and what the ability does, so I hope it's more informational than my prior ones. That also means as I add more stuff to the video, it's going to become longer and longer, but I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. Please comment whether you agree with me or not, or just genuinely chat in the comments. And please subscribe. Once we hit 100 subscribers, sometime soon after that, I promise to do a 2-hour Suika stream. So look forward to that, and let's start the video up, baby. And let's start with everybody's favorite green-haired crybaby, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku's B-Quirk, St. Louis Smash, can either be a solid movement tool or a close-range attack with solid stun. It does 114 to 171 damage depending on the quirk level, so if I say a number to number, it's level 1 and level 9 respectively. The move itself is a kick that goes towards where you aim it and has slight lock-on if an enemy is nearby. Warning, it will only go vertical if you are already off the ground, so if you want to use it upwards, always jump before use. Now that the basics are out of the way, I recommend using it mostly for movement unless you are out of an A quirk and you need a way to finish off an enemy. And that's all I really have to say about Izuku, but I think it's a solid quirk, not something great, but it serves its function well enough that I don't hate it. Now let's get into Destruction in its purest form, Bakugo. And the B quirk, Improvised Grenade, solidifies him as a DPS catastrophe, being a grenade that blows up on impact with a solid blast radius in 2 to 4 charges, doing 72 to 86 damage each. They are useful in any situation that you're not confident in hitting a shot, or you're trying to hit multiple people who are sticking too close together. It pairs well with what Bakugo has in general, and you can hit an enemy with 3 before they go into hit stun, meaning the damage from it stacks up fast if you throw them in rapid succession. The only big downside is since it is a grenade that's quite slow, if an enemy sees it before it hits them, they can dodge it with good timing. But, to be honest, it rarely happens anyways. This is a B-Quirk that is useful in almost any situation that listing them off would have to be a video on its own. Otherwise, let's move on. Now let's move on to one of the biggest glow-ups for a character in the game currently, Uraraka and her B-Quirk, Home Run Comet. Home Run Comet isn't bad by any means, but I think it gets an insane glow up as you level it up. At level 1, it's a small mailbox that has solid melee damage doing 3 hits of 34 to 38 damage, and has a decent duration. You can throw it for 24 to 30 damage, but it's a very small hitbox so you must be precise, and the outcome is them getting stunned and taking low damage. Now if it's on level 4, it becomes a much larger stone pillar that does 39 to 43 damage per hit, and has a bigger hitbox when thrown at the enemy doing 33 to 37. And finally, at level 9, it turns into a car that hits like a truck at close range, doing 45 damage each and has a large hitbox, when thrown doing 38. This quirk is honestly a lot of fun and works well with the entirety of Uraraka's kit. How good it is really depends on the quirk level, but as you get it higher, it becomes better and better and it's solid throughout. And I like it a lot. Moving on to Ida the Hedgehog and his Recipro Burst. Recipro Burst is a sideways kick with around a second of delay that does stun, has 2 charges, solid range for a melee attack, and solid damage ranging from 95 to 133 damage. It can be used to go up in the air, or as a strong attack to use at the end of your A quirk. It's really good for movement and damage. Plus, it auto-locks onto enemies if you're nearby, but it is easily predictable and dodgeable if the enemy already knows about it, or isn't already in hit stun due to your other moves. But through those criticisms, I like it a lot and it's a really good B quirk, but try to use it at awkward times to surprise your opponent and get a sneaky hit in. Next is Mr. Teapot Short and Stout himself, Todoroki. And I'm kind of mixed with Heaven Piercing Ice Wall. It's absolutely insane if you use it to attack, but most of the time you're going to be using it as a shield rather than an attack method. When you use it, you'll put an ice wall down of 3 different sizes depending on the level of the quirk. Level 1, level 4, and level 9 affect it respectively. And if you put it down on top of an enemy, it will do 124 to 190 damage, so it is rewarding if you can hit it. Now one little note that makes it a lot better, you can shoot through it and use your Y quirk through it while enemies cannot, but it is hard to see them through it, so don't expect much. And one more positive is the fact that you can use your Y quirk to get up close to use it, but I'm not often doing that because I'd rather use the Y quirk stationary to attack them with M1 anyways. If you can hit them with it safely, it is a really high damage quirk, but for the purpose of defense, it's alright. Now to a big player of the show, Froppy and her Ribbit Swing. Ribbit Swing, in my opinion, is a very good quirk for both her and general use. It has 2 different versions depending on in air or on ground, being a straight line and a cone respectively. It can combo into itself if you go from air to ground attack. Combos well with Froppy's A quirk if you don't have enough charges of it. It's just a really useful option that you will always be catering your playstyle towards, and it's honestly free damage most of the time, where the enemy is going to be screaming at their monitor while you do all of their shield with one combo. Great B quirk. Now onto one of the characters I suck at personally, Mr. Always Rock Hard Kirishima. Kirishima's red counter is a staple of his kit and a really high damaging punch that lunges you. Now, it lunges depending on where you're aiming it, which is mostly going to be at enemies, but can also be used for movement to get on high ground. But beware, if you want to go vertical with it, you need to jump beforehand or else you will only move on the ground. The punch itself does 86 to 162 damage, and most of the time you're going to be using it to keep the enemies in check by getting them into hit stun and doing heavy damage so they have to heal. Good thing is it's got aim assist on the enemy if you do it nearby. I don't love Kirishima because of his melee only archetype, but his B quirk is definitely a highlight and it's a really good quirk itself. Now finally time to talk about a quirk that makes a character, Momo. Momo's Create Unfailing Castle Wall has been and still is in my opinion the quirk that outshines everything else in her kit. She pulls up a metal wall and charges with it for around 4 seconds at quirk level 1 and around 6 seconds at level 9. While you use it, the quirk starts to recover as you charge, meaning if you don't use all your charges, you can usually get a shield back by the time you're done with the first one. And if you hit an enemy with the shield, it does 95 to 113 depending on the shield level. Momo's Castle Wall is by far one of her best moves, and it will probably always be what makes her kit the way it is. Sorry for anyone who loves the Y quirk, I'll get into it in that video. And moving on to Kaminari and his... Oh, fuck me. Well, let's try this. Indiscriminate Shock 1.3 million volts. Whew, alrighty, let's just call it B quirk for now. His B quirk is an AoE electric ball that does tick damage to anyone inside it, doing 19 to 34 respectively. It also gets bigger at level 4 and 9. It isn't bad at all and pairs well with his abilities to stun enemies with his attacks. It's not a lot of damage each time it hits, but it can stack with both the time it takes for an enemy to get out of stun or when they're trying to get out of it. I will say, beware of overloading your brain and putting yourself in hit stun. It is well tailored for Kaminari and that makes it really good. Now onto one of the most consistently controversial characters in my videos, Kendo, and her outrageously large hands. Her B quirk, Big Fish Shield, can feel useless at times, but it has a lot of niche uses, so let me get into them. Before we dive into that though, let's go over with the stats since they're quite simple. You pull out a shield that has 400 to 800 health depending on level that does recharge as you hold it out. There's 2 main ways you're going to be using the shield. The first one is to move in with it to get the enemy to focus on you and hit them with your A or Y quirk. And the second one being to protect your team as they shoot through it and the enemies cannot, being really good if you have comms. It's not an awful quirk, but you lose a lot of utility unless you are consistently playing with your team. And for solo play, it is just very undesirable. I'd rather her have something else, but it's not that bad to be honest. I just usually play solo, so it's not useful for me. Now we can move on to the character that I'm asking why is she in. We saw her like once in the show, Ibara. And I may have been really giddy with her A and general quirks, but if we are only talking about Via Dolorosa, its ability on paper sounds great, being a more close range shotgun type version of your A quirk, but in my opinion, if you are that close to the enemy in the first place, your Y quirk is infinitely better, or you should get further back to pelt them with your A quirk in the first place. It does 1 hit of 38 to 57 damage, then 2 to 4 smaller versions of it for 24 to 48. It only has 1 charge no matter the level, but recharges decently quickly. Too bad it just isn't that good compared to the other options. I dislike it greatly because as Ibara, you never want to be that close, and if you are, it's infinitely better to use your Y quirk. That's all there is to it. Now moving on to the symbol of peace himself, Mr. All Might. All Might's United States of Smash, which is one of the more skill-based and technical type attacks in my opinion, has 2 charges, and when you use one, you move towards your aiming, and during that time will have a hitbox to stun the enemy if you come in contact with them, doing 38 to 67 damage. Once you let go or the duration ends, you will slam in front or behind you depending on if you hit an enemy initially, doing 86 to 133. It's useful both if you're goated at it and can hit it near every time, or if you just use it while jumping to get vertical distance to get to higher ground for an advantage. It's solid, but can feel janky at times, but it's just a lot of damage, who's gonna complain about it? Back to the character that to me soured new releases till the GOAT Endeavor released, Aizawa. Luckily, Aizawa's Powerhouse Kick Barrage is a better version of Mount Lady's Y quirk because it hits multiple times and combos into your other moves, but But just because it's better than one quirk, doesn't mean it gets away from being on a bad character. But before I talk if it's good or not, let's get into the stats. It's a multi-kick barrage that does 14 to 21 per hit, and I'm not 100 on the total amount, but around 5 to 8 hits. And it does a larger chunk of damage, 34 to 48, with the final one. It does have some usability either when you grapple someone with your AA quirk, or need to get on high ground since your A quirk is very awkward with wall jumps. But the general character brings it down significantly, and being a melee only type attack, it just doesn't feel great on him. Now to the character that people hate because of his gimmicks, Cementoss. And his B quirk, Load Bearing Wall, is the closest thing you have to a close range attack that is either a wall to protect yourself or a decently high damage attack if it is created on top of an enemy, doing 119 to 171 damage, which is insane. It also goes from a straight line at level 1 to the option between the prior straight line, or with a horizontal wall at the tip of it after leveling it up. It's kinda like a better Todoroki wall, but without the upside of shooting through it, and I will add it goes from 1 charge at level 1 to 3 at level 9. It's just a decent ability at level 1 but gets exponentially better as you level it up, kind of like Uraraka's quirk. Now onto the new entry in the roster, the cocky Bad Dad Endeavor and his B quirk. And I'm about to glaze this man because it's one of the most satisfying quirks in the game to me. Searing Arrow is a long-range projectile that upon hitting an enemy, does initial damage that blows up into a pillar, damaging anyone in range. Now this is gonna take a minute because even though I've played him so many times, I have a lot to add. But first, let's get into damage. Searing Arrow goes from 1 charge to 2 at level 4 and finally to 3 at max, which is insane. Each Searing Arrow does 43 to 62 initial damage, then explodes into 86 to 114. And finally, the pillar goes up in radius as it levels up, so keep that in mind. First, if the enemy dodges it, but you technically hit them, the pillar will stick to them and explode even if they dodge the initial damage. It also can go horizontal if you hit a wall, closing the exit for a second or two if you throw it at that. And the range may be the furthest range in the game, only comparable to Toga's A quirk. They cannot dodge the pillar if it hits because they go into hit stun, making it exceptional damage with no chance of escape. And you can use it mid-special action to become Zeus, hurling thunderbolts at the poor mortals under you. Now final thoughts are, they should make the maximum charge at 2 and decrease the damage for higher levels, but at its current state, it's a way too high reward for such a significant low risk. Probably the best move in the game until patch. Now that I've got that off my chest, let's move on to Mount Lady and Mount Lady. But nonetheless, this is another quirk I'm not sure how I feel about because Celdera's Stomp in her normal form is honestly really underwhelming because they needed to balance the fact you can hit it multiple times in succession with hit stun, making the range and overall damage really low for my liking. It starts off with 3 charges each, doing 38 damage and causing a small shockwave around where the stunned enemies can get hit 3 times. At level 4, it transforms into an ever so slightly larger circle with 4 charges, doing 47 each, but stun capping at the prior 3 hits. Then finally at level 9, same story, 6 charges, slightly larger, but doing 57 damage per and still capped at 3 hits. Now in her giant form, which is a car on your foot with large AoE, it does 95 to 152 damage depending on the level, but you can only hit them once before they're stunned. The move itself isn't awful, but I do think it's too small of an AoE to be useful to you unless the enemy is melee or really wants to come close. Not much else to say. Now we move on to the edgy and bratty antagonist, Shigaraki. His B quirk Ground Destruction is both super weak but can be super annoying for the enemies at higher levels. When used, it creates a circular zone around you on the ground, acting like your A quirk as it does tick damage to any enemies standing on it. It starts as a real small size but grows into a great crater after you level it up to level 9. The damage goes from 18 to 29 damage per tick, with a solid tick rate to boot. It's an alright quirk. It's hard to use effectively, but you can just throw it out to see how the opponent reacts and force them to react. A very simple move for a very simple man. Oh no, I've got to talk about Dabi. Please, someone up there, don't make me talk about Dabi, please. Let's get this going. Dabi's B quirk Shadow Fires, and like any attack seen so far, instead of something you launch near towards an enemy, it's a trap you lay down that the enemy can only see if they get close to you or they see you put it down. It does 4 ticks of 19 to 21 damage per tick. It gains a larger radius as it levels up and has a limit of 5 down at once at any quirk level. One thing I've got to say real quick before we move on is the fact that the older traps, whatever level you put them down at, they stay that level even if you level it up from there on out. So try to make new traps after you've leveled it up significantly. Now let's get on to the uses of Shadow Fire. I would say there are 3 main uses of it. 1, putting them down in either commonly walked places for later, or putting them in hiding spots so you may knock someone who is low and trying to heal. The second one is to place it down where you are and play around them, since they can block a shot that was aimed at you, destroying the trap but negating the damage. The third one is the one I brought before. You can place it on down people to kill them near instantly. Any other uses of it are too situational for me to bring them up, but it's not an awful quirk, but seeing his only primary damage is his A quirk, and this does not help with doing damage mid-fight, it just doesn't work well with him. It has a lot of potential, and it's not a bad quirk on its own, I will admit that, but since Dabi doesn't have many good actual attack methods, it's just not that great for him at all. Okay, now time to cheer up with a good character with an even better B quirk. The blood-sucking yandere Toga, and her B quirk Slasher Killer Knife. Instead of throwing them, you decide to slash in front of you, gaining a solid movement speed and a constant attacking hitbox. Doing 10 damage with the startup hit, 20 to 43 with the next 2 startup hits, then 69 to 103 with the final hit. And any hit during the rest of the duration is also that 69 to 103. It's so good for either running away or hitting an enemy off rip, or you can even drive-by hit a bunch of enemies if you know they're nearby. A small little detail that makes it even better is the fact that if you hit an enemy, it will extend the duration of the attack, meaning if you somehow keep hitting people, you could theoretically infinitely use one charge. Just an insanely good quirk in most situations, like top tier level. And finally, after 5 pages worth of script and so much time I've been just wasting away, we can go on to Mr. Compress, a really simple but really cool B quirk. He has Sleight of Hand. It's a better version of Kendo's Big Fist shield, but it's a thin wall that absorbs and throws back the attacks. It absorbs 140 to 250 and bounces it back. Very simple and very effective. I want to say more, but that's really all there is to it. I like it a lot. And wow, this script took me a while. I've been doing it on and off admittedly, and that's probably why, but still, I've sunk so many hours into thinking about this. Thank you for watching till the end. I really appreciate it, and you're pretty unique because not a lot of people do from the percentages. I hope you either enjoyed learning something or just enjoyed the content in general. Please like and subscribe if you watched this far. Thank you for watching, and I bid you good day.